Everyone, it's good to be back for our meeting number 92, and I call this meeting to order. We are here today to study Bill C-50, or not to do clause by clause on Bill C-53, an act respecting the recognition of certain Métis governments in Alberta, Ontario, and Saskatchewan. Now that we're in session, I'd just like to remind everybody there's no screenshots and no photos allowed, and I'd like to do a big welcome to everybody who's come to see us today. The members of the public and who are here, so welcome. And always welcome back to our officials. Appreciate you being here again today. Colleagues, when we left off, we were on Clause 8, and speaking list, I had Mr. Schmale as from the last meeting, so that's where we had left off. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Schmale.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chair, and appreciate the opportunity to continue to work through Clause 8 and see if we can come up to a consensus here at the table. I want to give, first of all, a shout out to my colleague, Gary Vidal, for his work on trying to get something together that we can propose to the committee for potential consideration and a subsequent vote. And I do want to give compliments to the NDP and the Bloc as well for their feedback into this motion. I was very, very impressed with the level of engagement that has taken place because it seems to be we are stuck on number 8 just to address some of the concerns because, as I said right from the beginning, the goal here was to take this piece of legislation and recognize some of the comments that were made by Métis groups, First Nations group, and many others, and try to work towards a solution that would ease the concerns of those groups, but also support and encourage and really bring the spirit of this legislation to fruition through the adoption of it. So. Yeah, it's been a good go. We obviously don't have the resources that the government has and the team behind it, but I think through the work of Gary, Arnold, Bob, Mary Lynn, and Laurie, I think we've come up with something that might be acceptable to people at the table. Interested to hear what the partners will think as well, and hopefully we can get consensus on this and move forward and start tackling some of the other clauses that are here. But it is very important that we get this one right. That's why, for those that are just joining us, that's why it was tough to move past Clause 8 and start with the other ones, because a lot of what Clause 8 was about set the structure for much of what is in this piece of legislation, and in order to really vote on the others, we had to know that there was a solid Clause 8 that my friend Mr. Vidal will get to very shortly that will hopefully be acceptable to the governing side, maybe hopefully unanimous consent through that. It is a change that I hope recognizes the concerns as well as supports and encourages the spirit of this bill. So I will probably wait to speak after Mr. Vidal, and I look forward to that debate.
Thanks, Mr. Schmale. So procedurally, I'd just like to go through where we're at. I have no more speakers on Clause 8, which would then move us to discussion on CPC 3.2. And we do have an amendment that was put forward from Mr. Vidal that has been distributed to all members, so it is in order. The challenge that we have, because they're dealt with the way that they come in and where they fall within the bill, we need to deal with CPC 3.2 first. And for CPC 3.2, if it is adopted, first of all, I'll have to find out if the member wants to move it. But if it's moved and we debate it and then we adopt it, then Mr. Vidal's amendment, which because it's received now, there's not a number that we would normally have. So I'll give you its reference 127-96449. And you should have a hard copy of that. So if CPC 3.2 is adopted, then reference 127-96449 could not be moved or cannot be moved due to a line conflict. So that's the context for the debate that's about to happen. So now I'm going to call Mr. Viersen to see if he wants to move CPC 3.2.
Well, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair.
Okay, is it a point of order, Ms. Idlut, or do you want Mr. Viersen to
ask a quick question before he makes his motion?
Is that okay, Arnold? I'll go. Okay, Ms. Idlut, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So first of all, I just need to acknowledge that, as promised, the Conservatives and I did sincerely try to work together on something that we could agree to. Unfortunately, because of 3:30 coming too quickly, we weren't able to agree on the amendment. And I've been trying to work with my limited team to make sure that I submit an amendment that we can discuss. And I don't know if I've missed the deadline to, I have two versions of an amendment that I'm still trying to pick from to send to the clerk to make sure that, because it's also related to Clause 8. And I wonder what the procedural questions are.
Okay, you are able to move an amendment at any point when you have the floor, not from a point of order, but when you have the floor, and it needs to be in writing. So that's the only requirement. So having the floor and in writing, and then the amendment would be deemed in order, and we can then look at where it needs to go. Is that-
It's not deemed in order.
Or it can be accepted.
It can be accepted.
It can be accepted. Yeah, so Ms. Hidlute, the other comment is that once it's received in writing, I would need to take some time with my team here to review it to make sure that it is in order and that there would be no line conflict, those kind of technical details.
Can we suspend for a second while we figure that out?
I think that's just, well, Lori, are you asking?
And
Yeah,
for a few minutes?
yeah, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay, so we've had a request to suspend for a few minutes, so why don't we take 5 minutes? And we'll suspend, and I'll call the meeting back at, I have 4:45, so at 4:50, we'll return to session.
Before you suspend, Chair, if I could,
Yeah,
just for the
Mr.
record, I
Schmidt.
know we have a great gallery here, but if I could just get your leniency here, I do want to give it a shout out to a constituent of mine. A couple of them are back there, including Mike Perry. He's a lawyer. Don't hold that against him with the MNC. He ran against me in 2015. Clearly the one with more charm won, but I see more. But anyways, I just want to give him a shout out. And there's others of my constituents there too as well. I don't want to leave them out, but I just want to say hello and thanks for being here.
Okay, thank you. If anybody else has anybody else they need to acknowledge, let me know, and after we come back from the suspension. Yeah, but for now, Mr. Carr.
Just very quickly notice, I'm sure this will be caught, but there's just a typo. Under the heading Citizen A, self-govern, there's an M after the N. Oh, never mind. It's just government is split. Never mind. Yeah, there's just a gap. All good. I thought it was supposed to be govern.
All right, okay, we're going to suspend for 5
Hey,
minutes.
I was.
I will just get everybody to take their seats and to suspend any side conversations so we can resume our meeting. Just asking everybody to take their seats. We're ready to resume.
Do you want me to do battle?
Sure. Just see if we can get everybody seated. Just wait for Mr. Schmale to take his seat when he's ready. And so, Ms. Idlut, thank you for your amendment. So I'm going to lay this out, hopefully in a way that makes sense to everybody on how we'll proceed. So we're now on CPC 3.2, which is the Mr. Viersen amendment. If that amendment is adopted, it would negate or make out of order. Line conflicts would exist for both the new NDP amendment, which I'll use the reference number because, so it's 128-05860. That's the one that has just been distributed to members. There would also be a line conflict if CPC 3.2 is adopted with the new CPC Vidal motion, which is the 127-96449.
Perhaps in order. Tell them the order.
Okay, so the way that we'll be going them because of both the time received and the order of the legislation, we'll be dealing with CPC 3.2 first, which is Mr. Viersen's. And if that one, like I say, is adopted, then there would be line conflicts. If it's not adopted, then we would move to NDP, the new NDP one, which is the reference number 128-05860. If that one is adopted, then there would be a line conflict.
No.
Oh, no, then we can go with, okay, then we can go, we would then proceed to CPC, the new Vidal one, which is reference 127-96449. And then we would move to NDP 4.1, which was an original one that was submitted. So that's the sequencing that will go. So the first question is going to be for Mr. Viersen if he would like to move CPC 3.2.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this amendment, once again, is just around changing the word collectivity to community. I've addressed this at length in a previous meeting, and given the fact that I think that I will get to make this argument in multiple more times because I just sent in a draft to say, hey, can we change that word across the entire bill? That would happen over and over again. But I don't want to cause a line conflict with Mr. Vidal's amendment, which is much more substantial. So at this point, I will not be moving this amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Yeah. So we will then go to the next one, which is going to be the new NDP one that was just distributed, and it's reference 128-05860. And so I'll turn the floor to Ms. Idlut to see if she would like to move that amendment.
Is there a
Ms.
misunderstanding?
Idlut, you have the floor, and to move the amendment and to speak to it if you so desire.
Okay. First of all, I just want to reiterate that I really appreciate the effort that Gary and Jamie had in trying to work together on amending Clause 8 so that we do respect the wishes of the Métis nations that would be recognized in the columns. We really did try very hard to come to an agreement, and we weren't able to. And so I also appreciate the whole committee for allowing me to submit this in writing a few minutes ago. And what my proposed amendment does is that it adds clarity, hopefully about who this applies to, and also hopes to address the concerns that were brought by Vidal about the wording and how Indigenous governing body could be interpreted in different ways in different pieces of legislation, or that it could be interpreted in the same way in different pieces of legislation. So what this amendment tries to do is make it clear that when we mean by Indigenous governing bodies, that it applies to this legislation.
Okay. Does anyone want to speak to Ms. Idloot's amendment? Otherwise, we'll move to a vote. Mr. Viersen.
I just want to confirm here, I just got it in front of me. This will not, because Mr. Vidal's amendment starts at line 16, so this will not cause a line conflict.
Correct.
This
There's
is
no
line
conflict.
14.
So Ms. Idloot's could be
Okay.
adopted, as could Mr. Vidal's.
Okay. Yep. No.
Okay. Okay, are we ready to vote? Mr. Batiste,
Can we ask the officials what they think of the language in terms of what?
you're
what this
able
could
to
be?
put that question to
Yes.
the officials?
What-
Absolutely.
Can you give us a little sense of what the language is like and just what you think this may impact on? Does it improve this, or does it make it clear? You know, that's my question.
I think we're receiving this as recently as you, so we're giving you our preliminary thoughts. But I think including the phrase "for the purposes of this act," as has been suggested in this amendment, could in some ways be interpreted as a narrower version of the recognition than is set out otherwise. That's one possible interpretation of including that phrase. It's still, Clause 8 would still clearly set out the idea that a Métis government is authorized to act on behalf of a Métis collectivity. That remains true even with that phrase in there. So that is the one additional impact I think that might be worth considering at this point, is that could have a potential narrowing effect, but the rest of the clause still remains. I don't know if my colleagues have anything else to add.
I would say, again, having been one of the officials responsible for co-developing the text of this bill, that I understand it to undermine some of the interests of our partners. I know for certain that they have an interest in being able to point to language recognizing that they're an Indigenous governing body for the purposes of certain acts where they understand themselves to meet that test, an example being the Child and Family Services legislation. And so I think in a sense, this leads to an enduring uphill battle for our partners to make the point that they are Indigenous governments who have been mandated and authorized to represent Section 35 rights holders in instances and in the context of legislation where they should rightfully be respectfully dealt with as such. And so I think I agree with Ms. Redmond's comments. I think it may well achieve some of the aims of the committee. I don't mean to speak to whether or not it does or does not achieve the objectives of the committee, but I do think that were our partners here today giving testimony in front of you, that's likely what you would hear.
Mr. Batiste and then Mr. Viersen.
And Ms. Idlow.
Can we oh, well,
Yeah, okay, and then Ms. Idloot on the list as well. Okay,
I'll defer to them.
okay, Mr. Viersen.
You mentioned the child and families portion of this. Is there any other legislation that might be affected by as soon as we put it in for the purposes of this act? I recognize that we narrow it significantly. That was not a anticipated impact. Is there anything else that would, any other pieces that you could point to that would be an example besides?
I referenced child and family services legislation as it's specifically dealt with in the three agreements that were signed in February of this year. There's a section, and that was developed in collaboration with our colleagues at Indigenous Services Canada, that explicitly recognizes that for the purposes of the child and family services legislation, we clearly recognize that these governments are Indigenous governing bodies and that they meet the threshold for that. We didn't put in, we purposely did not put in a generic provision suggesting that for the purposes of any and all legislation. And I'm not to get into hypotheticals, but it's the simplest way to answer your question, Mr. Viersen. In the event that there was legislation dealing with, Atlantic fisheries that was to use the term, I would think the terms of that legislation would not fit this context. And so I understand there is a balance that the committee is intending to strike. I just want to make sure that the implications of the text are understood as best as I can provide context, but our council's views are more important than my own.
Ms. Redmond?
The clarification I would add here is that this doesn't necessarily have a direct impact on C-92 as a piece of legislation. What it does, it also doesn't prevent any of the Métis governments addressed by this bill from meeting that test, that definition of what is an Indigenous governing body, excuse me, for the purposes of that act. It's still possible they would meet that test. It's just, it would have to be shown. And I think one reading of what's in Section 8 here is that could still be shown from what's spelled out here, but I think it's sort of not perhaps as automatic as it might be without that phrase in there for the purposes of this act.
I guess I'm just wondering, is there something like the C-92? I'm very familiar with that. I was on this committee when that passed. But is there other areas where an Indigenous governing body is recognized by Canadian law that would suddenly be impacted by it? Because I see now that that's what that's doing, and this would narrow it significantly. And what would the ramifications of that be?
I don't have any other examples to give you off the top of my head of other legislation that uses that term, but it would be in the sense of any bill that uses that defined term, it would have to be shown that a Métis government, if they wanted that to meet that requirement in that act, would have to show they met that test.
Right. Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Ms. Edlut, over to you.
So my intention was not to narrow the scope. And this is the problem with the limited time that we've had. We ended up with this very much on a last minute, few minutes ago, that were able to submit. When I was talking with the lawyer, I was saying what Gary's concerns were, in that when you look at Indigenous governing body and the way it is generalized to be able to be interpreted by other pieces of legislation or other legislation using this as the Indigenous governing body, that what I was trying to do is make sure that it is clear, because we're talking about Métis self-governing bodies, that it applies to them. So I don't know what the fix could be. I don't know if maybe we should suspend again so that I could get more accurate instructions about what I was meaning to do, because if they are telling us that's not what my intent was, but because we had such a short amount of time to make a submission, when it's explained in that way, that's not what my intent was.
Yeah, I guess the question I would put to you, Ms. Edlut, is are you requesting to suspend? And if so, then we'll have to have a vote.
I am requesting to suspend for a few minutes again, just so that I could get a better worded amendment to submit.
Okay, so I'll take that to the members to see if there is support for, do you vote, or are we good to suspend? Okay, how long, Ms. Idlut, do you feel you would need? 10 minutes?
10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay.
10 minutes. Yeah.
We will suspend until 5:20. back in our meeting, and I understand there's been, it appears, lots of discussion amongst parties. So where we had left off is Ms. Idlut's amendment, which was the 128-05860, is the one before the committee. And so I understand that you want to withdraw that. And so we can do that through unanimous consent if there is unanimous consent. So do we have agreement for Ms. Idlut to withdraw 128-05860? Okay, we do. So that one is now withdrawn?
Yep.
Withdrawn? We have amazing cooperation happening here. Now, I understand there was a question on process design, or are we sorted out? Because where we would go now is Mr. Vidal's, and then it would be followed by, no, maybe Ms. Idlut's new one.
So unless there's an amendment.
So if we don't have there's been an additional amendment submitted by Ms. Idlut. If that's not being put forward, then we go to Mr. Vidal's CPC new one, which is the 127-96449. So, Ms. Idlut, are you willing to go to Mr. Vidal's? Okay, so then we would go to Mr. Vidal's amendment. So, Mr. Vidal, I'll ask if you'd like to move that amendment.
I would, Mr. Chair. Thank you. It's been an interesting discussion, and in response to my colleague, Mr. Batiste, yesterday about the collaboration with this committee, I'd like to actually comment on that, because over the last few days, as Ms. Idlut said, there's been a tremendous amount of emailing and conversations and meeting in back rooms and whatever, trying to figure out a way forward on this. And maybe we didn't come to one we all agreed on, but we've got a number of ideas that we think will help solve some of the challenges and will address some of the concerns we've heard from people in both the testimony we heard at the table and in the hundreds of written submissions that we received from many people across the country. Over the course of the hearings on this piece of legislation, I have continually commented on how critical it is that we try to get this right. I've consistently commented on the fact that how we do this is really, really important in finding our way forward in our relationship with many people across the country. And it has been my sincere desire, and I know it was that of Ms. Idlut and Ms. Gill and different team members to try to get there. So I do want to move this amendment. I do want to have some discussion around it. I know it's not perfect, and I know it may not be popular with everybody, but I think it really does address many of the concerns we heard. And so, Chair, do I need to read this whole thing, or can I just move the...
You can move.
So I'll just move Amendment 127964449. That's adequate for technical purposes. Thank you. That saves me about 5 minutes of reading. I would like to address some of the elements of this amendment, and I would like to, there's a couple other things I would like to read into the record. So this amendment, as I said, addresses many of the concerns that we've heard. It uses language, it literally uses language from the 3 self-government agreements back from February 23 for the 3 Métis Nations. I want to take a moment and I want to read from the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan Agreement on Chapter 5, Clause 502, C, D, and E. It's on page 14. It's from the recognition section, which is exactly the section of this piece of legislation that we're talking about, is recognition. And I get I'm picking out a piece. I can read the whole thing if somebody wants me to, but I want to pick out, it's talking about some of the definitions here. And I guess I would think technically it's called subclause C. It starts that the Métis government is the democratic representative government of the Métis Nation within Saskatchewan and has responsibility for providing responsible and accountable self-government for its citizens and Métis collectivity throughout Saskatchewan. Subclause D says the Métis government is the Indigenous governing body of the Métis Nation within Saskatchewan. And then subclause E says the Métis government is exclusively mandated to represent the Métis Nation within Saskatchewan based on the authorizations it receives from its citizens and the Métis collectivity throughout Saskatchewan comprised of those citizens in respect of collectively held Métis rights, interests, and claims, and in particular, and then it goes on to talk about implementing and exercising Métis Nation of Saskatchewan inherent rights to self-determination, including the right to self-government, and there's a number other of sub-clauses to the sub-clauses, or however you technically would frame that. My purpose in presenting this amendment in this manner is that, and I'm going to be really frank with you. Since Saturday afternoon, I've lived and breathed and whatever this for 4.5 days now, trying to find the balance. I did that with 2 people on my side and some work with Ms. Idlut's team. We don't have tons of people to do this work, so we went back and forth with the legislative clerk council, who frankly was fabulous. And I think this is the 5th amendment she's put together for me as we've tried to work through this, to be honest with you. This is the one that we that we chose to utilize, but she has been fabulous in working with us and giving us advice. We said, here's what we're trying to accomplish, and she was tremendous at providing us the legal advice to put these words, and she's the one that came up with a bunch of the language in this, in fairness. I want to give credit where credit's due. I believe that this amendment creates very clear, unambiguous language, and it leaves no doubt whatsoever as to who is included or not included in this legislation. And I think from, I can't maybe say the vast majority, but we heard from so many people that concern about the clarity about who is and who isn't included in this whole relationship that we're creating with this very important legislation. We heard it over and over and over again. My intent is to create clear, unambiguous language so that we're not dealing with this somewhere down the road in a way that's causing issues for anybody, frankly. So I tried to make it a compromise. I tried to make it a fair balance of the concerns we heard from so many sources. And then the other thing, the last thing actually there's two more things. The language in the amendment also then goes on to define citizens in each of the three Métis nations, and those definitions are literally from each of the independent agreements of the Métis nations from February 23. I think some of them were February 24th, 23, and some of them were February 23, 23. The language is coming right out of those agreements. And the last thing that I would like to add to the conversation is that out of respect for the conversations I had yesterday with some of the stakeholders, I wanted to ensure that we actually left Indigenous governing body in here because it was important in the context of how that applies to C92. And so I didn't want to come to a place where I took that out. So there was a concern by I'm specifically, I was talking to some of the folks from the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. They assured me they were talking to the people from the other provinces. And I wanted to leave that in there out of respect because this is what kind of triggered some of the concerns in the first place. But out of respect for the fact that this is critical in the context of child family services under C92 and ensuring that they have a place there, I wanted to put it back in. And as explained to me, putting it in there, the assurance of putting it in there was to ensure that they are included in that definition. And so if you look at the end of the amendment, not only does it take the standard definition of Indigenous governing body that we talked about the other day in so many different places, but it adds, and for greater certainty, includes a Métis government. So nobody is left to doubt whether a Métis government is included in this definition of Indigenous governing body, especially as it would come back and refer to the approach on C92. So my intent, in fairness, was to find a balance, to find a compromise. My intent was to try to get it right, and I look forward to the comments of maybe the officials at the table that would have some opinion on this, and to my colleagues, and let's see where this goes. I'm happy to hear the comments of others.
Just before I go to Mr. Batiste, well, you know what, I'll go to Mr. Batiste first. So Mr. Batiste, over to you.
And I do appreciate the comments of Mr. Vidal, and I do appreciate all of the collaboration, the discussion, and the hard work in trying to find the right balance on this. You know, as being part of government, you know, we do our best to work with the stakeholders, and I know that the discussions have been ongoing through this committee meeting, and I think if you seek it, Mr. Chair, you will see unanimous consent to suspend, to have those conversations with the stakeholders and pick up where we left off tomorrow.
Thank you. Before we suspend, and I believe having seen and had some conversations that there is consent of the committee to suspend until tomorrow. I just want to check, though, before we go, there are a number of committees that are canceled tomorrow. So there are resources available. We can ask for resources, but without the will of the committee, that doesn't do us any good to do that. And so the question is, are we good? Resume. And I know that time is needed to have the discussions with stakeholders and perhaps between parties. I really do appreciate the efforts that's being made. Do you want me to request additional resources for tomorrow or stay with the 3:30 to 5:30 time slot that we have? Yeah.
I feel that we have taken a turn here to the path that I think we can get through. through past Clause 8. I think with the developments that's coming through, we'll be able to get through many more clauses tomorrow. I do know that for myself personally, tight before. I'm fine after, however, but I drive. There's a number of my colleagues here that have flights booked already. Might be problematic, but to the government, I think we can get through enough to ensure the government's happy and our stakeholders are happy. We might not get through the whole thing, but we'll, with the existing frame, because I think we've come to some kind of agreement, one way or the other, on Clause 8.
Okay, I'm getting nods to that. So with the agreement of the committee, we will suspend, and then we'll resume tomorrow at 3:30 for our regular 2-hour slot, 3:30 to 5:30. We'll see how far we...
We'll be in room 415.
And tomorrow, I have been told we'll be in room 415. So, yeah, back to our regular room. Today, we'll go to a different room. I had been informed that there were members of the Métis Nations coming to see us today, and so we tried to get as big a room as possible. But tomorrow, unless I'm told otherwise, we will be back in our normal room at the other side of this building. With that, colleagues, thank you so much, and we're now suspended.